And welcome back to the NWR Virtual Investor Conference. I'm Andrew Gagan from Ausbiz. Great that you can join us. Our next company is BCAL Diagnostic. It's an Australian screening and diagnostic company committed to the early, accurate diagnosis of breast cancer and therefore early intervention and improved outcomes for women. Over the past decade, BCAL has developed a non-invasive blood test for the detection of breast cancer, with results to date demonstrating 91% specificity and 87% accuracy. The test is initially designed to complement current imaging technologies such as the mammogram, with the aim of becoming a monitoring and screening tool suitable for women of all ages and backgrounds in any location. BCAL has partnered with global integrated cancer care and cardiac provider GENESISCARE to conduct clinical research required for regulatory approvals across several jurisdictions, commercialisation and market entry points. Just a reminder, if you would like to ask a question, do so at the end of the presentation by using the Q&A panel on your screen. Let me now introduce BCAL Executive Chair, Jane Shaw. Jane.
Thank you, Andrew, and good morning, everybody. Thank you for the opportunity to present to you today. So why BCAL? BCAL has been working on developing a blood test for breast cancer over the last 10 years. We've actually developed a blood test that can differentiate between breast cancer and non-breast cancer patients using an 18-candidate lipid biomarker panel. To date, it's got 91% specificity and 87% accuracy. And we're about to start clinical trials in Sydney. We've got a defined pathway through the regulatory process and commercialisation. And we've got a strong board and management team who've got execution experience in diagnostic tests. Might go to the next slide. Next one after that, sorry. So breast cancer, unfortunately, breast cancer accounts for about 40,000 deaths in the US on an annual basis and 3,000 deaths in Australia. Currently, the gold standard screening tool for breast cancer is mammography. And in the previous year, there was about 39 million mammograms in the US and about 1 million mammograms in Australia, although those numbers have been directly impacted on breast cancer screening due to COVID. Might move to the next slide. So early diagnosis is extremely important. If you are diagnosed with stage 1 breast cancer, there's a 98% survival rate. Depending on the stage, the further advanced the cancer, the more impact the clinical and invasive the clinical surgery, including radiotherapy, chemotherapy. So if you're better to diagnose the breast cancer as early as possible. So at the moment, as I said, the next slide, the screening process involves, for women under 50, it's still been your hand, as in self-examination. For women 50 to 75, the gold standard is mammography, and that's due to the density of the breast tissue in the breast. That's why women from 50 to 75 can have mammography. So currently you go for a mammogram that involves the compression of your breasts in 2 metal plates. It's reviewed by radiologists. If it's suspicious, you can then go for a biopsy, and then you have, if the biopsy is suspicious even further, they think there's a chance of cancer, you then go for potential treatment, which initially is a lumpectomy. In terms of BCAL Diagnostics, our first market entry point is going to be along the mammogram that will give you a more accurate test. So we will take the blood test while you're having the mammogram. It's a similar market entry route to cervical screening that happened about 10 years ago. You'd go for your standard cervical screen, and the GP would ask, would you want to have a more accurate test? And women would pay for the thin prep test, and that would give them a more accurate reading. In terms of mammography, it's actually limited due to the accessibility, geography. It's actually quite a painful procedure, and about 50% of women eligible for mammogram screening elect not to have the test It could be cultural, religious reasons, pain, and it's limited to women 50 to 75 plus. The current breast cancer market at the moment globally is about $5 billion, which is going to increase by about 7.3% to 8.7 billion. At the moment, there's various screening tools. So for women, as I said, under 50, you can have an ultrasound, you can have MRI if you've got the BRCA gene mutation, but it's very difficult to get a referral for the MRI, and it's also very expensive. There's currently no routine early detection and monitoring options for breast cancer. So another reason why early detection is very important is there are women, particularly in the Jewish community, that have the BRCA1 and BRCA2 gene mutation. And those women have a high incidence of being diagnosed with breast cancer. Currently, many women elect to have self-selected mastectomies in fear of developing breast cancer. Two women in the public eye, Angelina Jolie and Sharon Osbourne, have publicly spoken about their decision about having elective mastectomies because of the potential of developing breast cancer with the BRCA gene. So again, we're looking at a market entry point where we'll be screening women with the BRCA1 and BRCA2 gene mutation in terms of monitoring them for breast cancer. This would allow women who are in the child-rearing years to have a more informed choice about whether they choose to keep their breasts at that time or not. So as I said, we've got a 4-stage rollout strategy. And the reason for the 4 market entry points is that each clinical study will provide significant clinical data to support each of these product claims as we enter the 3 markets that we're going to be entering, which are Australia, Europe, and obviously the US. So the first product will be an adjunct blood test with mammography. The second is going to be a monitoring tool for women that have actually had treatment for breast cancer. So at the moment, there's a high incidence of women having reoccurring breast cancer within 5 years post-treatment. So if there was a blood test that could give peace of mind to women in this area, this is a strong requirement by clinicians and also patients to have peace of mind to monitor whether that breast cancer actually reoccurs. As I said earlier, in terms of routine early detection for women with the BRCA1 and BRCA2 gene. Our 4th market entry is the whole reason why BCAL Diagnostics evolved, and that was a comprehensive breast cancer screening test for all women everywhere in all markets. So at the moment, as I said earlier, these 3 market entry points will give us the significant clinical data we will need to enter into the market. We're looking at developing a comprehensive algorithm, evaluating the biomarkers to take us to the next stage. So how does our science actually work, and why is it different? And as I'm sure you're aware, there have been billions of dollars spent on research in terms of genetics, RNA, and proteomics. As I said earlier, our test is based around lipids. So our hypothesis is, or what we've been able to demonstrate through our science to date, is that when there are changes at a cellular level, these cells excrete extracellular. These cells excrete exosomes, and we look at the actual exosomes, and then we break them down and we look at their lipid profile. Now, in that lipid profile, there are a range of lipids that have an algorithm that we have developed that provide the differentiation between cancer and non-breast cancer patients. So in terms of our key developments and where we've come from and where are we actually going, so the company started in 2010, and those studies the research was initiated in Australia. We then went to lodge our patents and discovered that the University of Louisville and Kentucky had also replicated the same science. They'd lodged the patents. They'd actually lodged the patents, and what we became we've got the exclusive license for breast cancer and lung cancer for lipidomics. We funded the research in the US and also the patents for the first 6-7 years. And then in 2016, 2017, when the proof of concept had occurred, we brought the science back to Sydney, which is now based at the Charles Perkins Centre, which is part of the Sydney University campus. So from 2017 to 2021, we continued to replicate the science. We did various cohort analysis, and that led us to the scientific results to where we are today, which have given us a accuracy of 87%, a sensitivity of 83%, and a specificity of 91%. We work with a range of clinicians, and when we presented this data to them in August last year, they recommended to us that we took the science into the real world setting. And that is why we have been through the capital raising process, where we can actually take the science into the real world environment. So what does our clinical study program actually mean? And where are we starting, and what are we doing with the capital we've raised? So the clinical trials are initially being run at Royal Prince Alfred Hospital, Lifehouse, and New South Wales Breast Screen. We're collecting samples of 1,000 patients from these different clinical facilities. And then we are running our biomarkers and our test through these 1,000 patient samples. This will take us to the further validation and development of the test. We'll then take to study 2, where we'll look at further longitudinal studies, where we'll be monitoring women through the different ranges of actually having breast cancer, that will assist us in developing the monitoring tool for breast cancer. In terms of scientific development, the key for us at the moment, and what could have an impact on us, is the accessibility to quality blood samples and to a strong multidisciplinary platform. So we've partnered with GENESISCARE. We've partnered with their research organisation, and we're working with them on developing a comprehensive research programme in all the markets that we plan to commercialise the product. So in terms of Australia, GENESISCARE are one of the largest private providers of cancer care services. They're in the UK, the US, and Spain. So they've got a multidisciplinary network with breast surgeons, breast radiologists, and also oncologists. So we can collect the samples, we can work with the clinicians and make sure that we're developing a clinical appropriate test, one with utility that the surgeons are happy to use. So we've got those strategic partnerships in those networks, and we're looking at currently collecting samples from the UK, Spain, the US, and other markets. Our commercial pathway, as I said, the clinical studies are always in process. Our clinical studies 1 and 2 will provide the clinical data that we need to take our first test to TGA, and we'll also be looking at developing a laboratory developed test in the US, and we're talking to some potential US partners at this time. We've had discussions with TGA in Australia, and they've said that we are a clinical disruptor and that we'd probably be eligible for the priority access path. So we're working with them in terms of our clinical trials to make sure that our data meets the regulatory and quality requirements. In terms of timeframes, we hope to be doing that in the middle to the end of next year. In terms of the laboratory developed test, we're in discussions with potential partners as we speak. And also we're looking at developing and launching the adjunct test for mammography in about 2020, at the end of 2023. And as I said earlier, all those clinical studies will give us the clinical data that we need to enter those market entry points. In terms of key partners, the fact that the science has been replicated in 2 markets, particularly the US and also Australia, gives us some confidence that the science is reproducible in those markets. So we've still got strong relationships with the University of Kentucky and Louisville. In terms of research and development, the Eyes on Kit is part of our product development pathway to commercialization. So we've got a commercial agreement with Eyes On and also other laboratory companies within Australia. Our clinical studies, we've got strong links with obviously Lifehouse, the Cancer Institute, and we've got a comprehensive multidisciplinary team of clinicians that are working with us on developing the team. We've also got GENESISCARE, Thermo Scientific. We're working with a company in India called Core Diagnostics that have accessibility to a whole range of blood samples that we require. Our patent summary, is outlined and is detailed in our prospectus. We're also, the recent science that has been developed, particularly in Australia, and the product development aspect, we're currently working with FB Rice in terms of lodging further patents around the science, around the process, and particularly around the algorithm that's been developed in relation to those 18 panel biomarkers. In terms of key people involved in the organisation, we've got a strong board. We've got Dr. Marilyn Slay, she's an independent director. Dr. Marilyn Slay was the CEO of Evogenics, a diagnostic company that was developed in Australia and was sold in the US. We've got Jonathan Trollope, who's worked with the organisation for about the last 8 years. He's an experienced director and he's on many listed company boards, including Propel, and he chairs a number of financial fund management companies. Got Ron Phillips, who's the former New South Wales Health Minister. He's the co-founder with me and has been involved in BCAL for the last 10 years. And prior to that, we owned Sydney Breast Clinic in about 2005. And we've also got Mark Burrows. He's been a key influencer in the ASX and ASIC over the last many years. He's very well connected in the US and Europe, and he's very passionate about getting the BCAL test to market. At the operational level, it's very important that we've got people that can execute. We've got Dr. Jane Ryan, who's responsible for our product development. We've got Dr. Amani Bartase, who has got extensive experience in this field. She's worked at Harvard and many research institutions within the US. We've also got Alison Cook, who was the CEO of Genetic Technologies, and she was responsible for taking a blood diagnostic test to the US market within the last 2 to 3 years. So we've got a comprehensive execution team. As I said, with our clinical trials, we've got Paul Cohen, who works with us on clinical trials and Genesis Research Organisation. The other key component to our development and progress is the rigour around the science. We're very fortunate to have Dr. Kim Ekros. He's the lipidomic expert for North America and the UK. He chairs the Global Committee on Lipidomics Research. We've also got Professor Peter Meikle from the Baker Institute. He's very influential in the Australian and Asian research for lipidomic research. They work very closely with Armani in terms of the data, the algorithm, and key components of the test. In terms of our clinical advisors, we've got Professor Sanjay Warrior, breast surgeon. We've got Cindy Mack, Associate Professor Craig Geddy. Also Dr. Mary Rickard. She was responsible for introducing breast screening to the Australian, Singapore and Italian markets. She also sits on the Volpara board. She's part of our management team, as well as being on the scientific advisory board. So we're very fortunate that we've got a key team of people who can execute and deliver and take this test to market, which is our ultimate goal. Thank you for your time.
Jane, thanks very much for the presentation. Let's go to some questions now. And Jane, you were just mentioning there the key personnel involved in the company, and a question in relation to the funds raised during the IPO, part of those funds to expand the team.
Yes, exactly. So in terms of expanding the team, we've taken on, we've gone from a team of 2 scientists, we've now got 5 scientists as part of the team. We've just recruited 3 breast care nurses who are going to be working with us with the clinical trials. In terms of the regulatory and commercial side, we're working with some organisations within Australia and within the US who've got experience in taking the test to market. We'll be looking at recruiting a chief operating officer within the organisation as the organisation gains the momentum.
And in reference to that partnership with GENESISCARE, do you intend to develop that arrangement further?
Yes, well, it's mutual benefit to both companies. Basically, GENESISCARE is committed to improving women's outcomes with breast cancer. And if we can work with them in the diagnosis side, detecting the cancer earlier, and working with them in terms of commercializing the test. Obviously, when you're taking a test into the European markets and the US market, you need to have a strong base of clinicians who can work with you and educate the women. And part of developing the breast cancer test is making sure the clinicians and the doctors are confident that the test is accurate and meaningful to women.
Okay, and can you talk to any competition in terms of other potential diagnostics for breast cancer? And I guess maybe elaborate on the patents that you have at the moment.
Yeah, blood tests for all cancers is going to be the standard in care in the future. You know, people will go for standard blood tests, similar to what men have been doing for the last few years when they've been going for a blood test for PSA. In terms of our competition, as I said earlier, many people have been working on genomics, proteomics, RNA. We are, to our knowledge, the only company that's working on a lipidomic breast cancer detection test. I think it's healthy to have a good competition. There's a company in the US called GRAIL and Guardant who are also working on breast cancer tests. I don't believe there will be just one test for breast cancer, but obviously there's a race to get the test to market.
And Jane, just in terms of what investors or potential investors can expect as far as news over the coming months, I guess perhaps you could talk more to clinical trials and regulatory approvals. Yeah,
so we want to have a comprehensive communication to the community and also to our shareholders. So obviously the number of clinical trial sites within Australia will increase, and we're in discussions with groups around that now. In terms of our commercialization development, more strategic partnerships will be announced. And also, as I mentioned earlier, we'll be discussing further initiatives in some of the global markets, particularly in Europe and the US over the next few months. And also we'll be riding a stepping stone process as we hit our milestones. We'll be communicating those milestones at the times that we've stated in the presentation today, and also scientific results. We've just ran 340 samples. We should have the results for those that we plan to be announcing in October, and we'll be having a comprehensive shareholder update on the 13th of October this year.
Jane, thanks for the presentation and thanks for joining us from BCAL Diagnostics.
Thank you.